our next speaker is Dr. Stephen Norris. There he is. So quite a privilege to have Dr. Norris with us. I got to tell you that Dr. Norris has had lots of influence on my work. I consider him a mentor of mine. He's a leading performance consultant and applied sports scientist who is much sought after as a pivotal speaker and presenter internationally. Stephen focuses upon the understanding and creation of sustainable systems and cultures aimed at performance and excellence. What's really interesting is Stephen is also a qualified LEGO Serious Play Facilitator and utilize this method in a high customized manner to assist performance groups become more effective in the pursuit of achievement of their specific objective. Real privilege. Thank you very much, Steve, for being with us. I know it seems like you've been with us since the start of the morning of this presentation here. Again, much appreciated. Thank you. And the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Andre. And thank you to obviously Frank and Wayne as well for putting this on. And I feel humbled and very privileged to be in such an exalted company and also with such a large audience across the globe. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I do have some slides to show, so I'm going to leap into those and sort of explain my sort of rationale to you. I was asked really to talk about building players from the inside out. And as I thought more and more about that, I thought, yes, we could go into some of the specifics to do with age group athletes, then on through into senior performance. But the reality, as we've heard very clearly from virtually every speaker this morning, it's incredible, the golden thread, is that it is all about the coaches, the environment, and the behaviors around those environments. So I'm going to focus on you as the coaches around this aspect and how you apply certain, if you like, constraints, challenges, opportunities for the athletes that you actually coach. And so I have a number of slides. This first one is really just that proverbial one to throw the rock in the pool, make you think a little bit. You don't have to agree with what I say at all. I'm not looking for consensus. I'm looking for 20 minutes to perhaps give you some things to consider, and particularly to intertwine things with some of the other things you've actually heard this morning. One quote I wanted to start out with is this one. We must remember that the past is not always behind us, but more often in front of us, blocking our way. And in this moment, this juncture for the Earth, where we're dealing with a pandemic, this type of quote is even more important because we're moving into areas of behavior as perhaps there are restriction lifts happening in various parts of the world. For the world of sport, the return of various activities happening, the possibility of a Summer Olympics next year. We have to
Steve, sorry to interrupt you for a second. We're just wondering if you started to show your slides because we can't see them. So we just want to double check.
Okay, let me try this then.
Okay.
Can you see that?
Right now, no. Oh, now it's coming.
Oh. Okay.
Aha. Yeah,
so
we're good.
I'm okay to go on from where I was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my point is that we're moving into a new phase, if you like, of behavior sets, and to simply, as I've actually observed already, groups thinking that they can simply make the odd tweak, that they actually can just get away with probably just doing minor alterations to whatever they've done before is an erroneous way. And then the next thing is, although I don't really want to use this word opportunity when we're faced with such dire consequences of the situation the planet has been in the last few months, this is actually an opportunity for us to all take a deep breath and really consider what we've been doing at all levels of sport, and then everything that's to do with that, and particularly when we're dealing with children and youth, and the fact that their lives are very complex, and sports and activity is just one part of their overall growth and development. One of the key things for me is to try to suggest to you very strongly is what makes you as a coach stand out. there's lots and lots of choice for elite athletes, senior age groupers, junior age groups, and parents to choose from in the choice of activity and environments they put their children into. So what are the fundamental elements that are really going to make you stand out? What is really, if you like, and I don't mean this from a business sense, I mean it from the environmental sense, the exposure, the experience aspect. What is the value proposition, if you like, of a youngster coming to your particular activity, to your particular environment, to have you as a mentor for whatever amount of time you might be fortunate to have them in your care? And on that note, I think you have to ask yourself some very serious questions. Why do you do this? Why do you coach? What is the purpose almost of your existence in that particular domain? And this is a very serious one because, you know, right at the start, Wayne talked about us being slaves to physiology, and I'm one of those pseudo physiologists, if you like, because that's where I've tended to, for much of my career, reside within that particular field, although perhaps over the last decade, not there. And I would agree with him. Physiology at times has ruled the roost, often as not because of where the underpinnings of that particular domain actually came from and the, if you like, the gradual emergence of the sports sciences. But we've really lost, if you like, this aspect of the philosophical underpinnings, which has been so clear from virtually every speaker on this particular format today. And why I want to stress this to you is it comes back to that question I just asked. Why? Why are you doing these things? What is your reason to be, if you like? And it is interesting that if we look back through history to the ancient times, where we had the ancient philosophers that we can all possibly name, Socrates, etc., etc., then through the earlier Middle Ages and through the Renaissance period on into the Industrial Age. And yet now, I guarantee most of us would be very hard pressed to name a philosopher of the 21st century. And why is that? It's amazing that most academics that go on to do doctorates do doctors of philosophy of their science. And often there's not very little philosophy of understanding why they're actually doing something, what makes them tick. Because we can teach them all the stuff. You can learn physiology or some aspects to do with psychology or mechanical engineering, but why are you actually doing this? And I think for coaches to understand their underlying philosophy is important because it then starts to shape how you think about your overarching guiding principles. What are the behavior sets that are sacrosanct to you? What are the values that you're going to try and instill in the environment that you create? And remember this, the environment that you create as a coach is the one thing that you have probably the greatest amount of control over. I get very worried when people want to rush off and simply build Taj Mahal sport facilities, the next glass and chrome, glossy concrete monolith to worship sport at. But I would remind you that it's far more than simply having a building. It's what goes on in that building and who is actually doing it that is important. And this is absolutely critical. Now, obviously, we're faced with ever-changing conditions. It's forced upon us this time by a pandemic. But the reality for those of us in sport, that's business as usual. Ever-changing conditions, rules change. The athletes constantly change with the generations. The performance levels change, technology changes, but even to some degree, competition formats change. And then there's the ever-present aspect of the media and different forms of media changing. Just think of the medium that we're on right now. So change is a massive aspect. And I'd like to just start this aspect, this next 2 minutes or so of my presentation, going through some of the 5 critical elements of dealing with change. And this is from Jim Hemmeling's very fine talk, if you do a search for him on TEDx, from the Bay Area in San Francisco. And he talks about one of the key things is, if you're going to deal with change, you need to have the leadership that really is able to promote with great clarity, as we've heard from previous speakers, around what the future could look like. Even if there is, as we heard from Angus in particular, aspects to do with volatility or uncertainty and unclear, complex aspects and an ambiguous future or even outcomes. This is very important for us to understand. And then the next thing about this is, whatever we're going to be doing over the next few months, we have to go all in. You can't have sort of a 50% commitment to something. You've actually got to really commit yourself and your organization to acting in a certain way. And then one aspect that's often forgotten is providing the tools to everyone that's going to be involved. What are the guidelines? How do we behave? What type of technology do we want? Etc., etc. How do we administrate this? How do you sign up for something? And so these elements are really important, foundational tools to be able to execute on that commitment and that vision. As we move forward, this aspect, this classic Kaizen principle, once you stop learning, you start dying, and it will be a thematic for me for the rest of my time with you. And the reason why I bring this aspect up is you're really interested in sustainable performance systems, so that the system, the brand, if you like, that you are representing continues ad infinitum, the classic performance on demand, but now for you and the organization, not simply for the athletes themselves. So even as personnel change or the rules change or whatever, you can get to the desirable performance required. And as we've heard from other speakers this morning, again, I think Angus talked about the guts in his talk of the actual systems that are in place that actually foster this ability to withstand whatever change is going on. And that leads us to the aspect of having some level of transformational leadership. Leaders that can lead, they understand, as John said, the big picture as well as being able to dive into the minutiae, but they also have an ability to stand back and listen to their team of staff and others that can actually provide support and specific aspects or specific points of leadership through whatever the task actually is. And where do groups always fall down? Why can't they actually see these things? Well, interesting enough, one of the most important ones is this aspect of being a human being. And I get very concerned about this because what I find is that we rush for ticking boxes of sports science, if you like, and sport medicine, but we don't necessarily understand, as we've heard so clearly this morning, the aspect of connectivity, of behavior, of communication. The classic elements ultimately to do with not simply sort of the big five of global performance, physiology, psychology, technique or biomechanics, tactics, and even health and lifestyle, but things such as emotional intelligence. Now, it may seem to be a little bit of a buzz phrase at the moment, but it's been around a while and we've ignored it because we've often focused so much on technical, tactical elements in our coach education and then into our behavior sets in the real world. But if you look at emotional intelligence, it's as important for you as coaches as it is for mentoring your young athletes, being self-aware, being able to self-regulate. Nothing wrong with emotions, but you need to know how to channel them and use them correctly. What motivates in a certain circumstance or in general? What kind of empathy do you have? Particularly, say, you're dealing with a learner trying to hit a golf ball. You as a coach having empathy for that situation, even though you yourself are incredibly competent at doing that and can do it blindfolded, one hand, a non-dominant way, whatever it might be. But to have the empathy for the beginner, and empathy, as we've seen in the current world, is something so sadly lacking. And then ultimately, all wrapped up in this is the social skills to be able to communicate effectively. And which coaching courses do that? Which leads me to this point. One of the challenges, I think, for us around our coach education is the fact that we often have very linear models, even those that profess to deal with various levels of competency. The reality, unfortunately, is we almost have generic one size fits all. And what I mean by that, I go and do a coaching course, and it doesn't matter what my target audience is. I've got the coaching qualification, I've got the piece of paper. We don't necessarily understand that we should have coaching structures and systems, and although there may be overlap, that are much more audience specific. So the ability to become a world-leading coach of 8 to 12-year-olds, right at the highest level, what does that look like? And if you're just wanting to start on the rung of coaching that group, what does 101 coaching look like for a coach of 8 to 12-year-olds? Or 13 to 16-year-olds, 17 to 21-year-olds, high performance athletes, girls going through puberty versus males going through puberty. Do we think really about that? And therefore, what does the mosaic of coaching information actually look like that fits around the construct of an athlete development framework, whatever model or framework one cares to follow. So those are critical factors for me, which leads then, of course, as this human being, you clearly have established what your purpose is meant to be, and have you clearly stated what that is. And what I do find very alarming is that everyone rushes, of course, for their visions and missions and all these type of things, but they never really considered them and putting them into practice. Everyone and their dog has a mission. Well, I don't care. What I want to know is, are you showing the world you're on a mission? And there is a vast difference between simply having a statement and actually living that statement every day, which comes to this, of course. Most places and most groups have some kind of strategic document, but you need to live it again every single day. How is everyone held accountable? What kind of lead metrics result in a final lag metric? How and who is responsible for all of this? So live your strategy, don't simply have one. And again, I come back to this aspect of the environment. This is the thing that you shape very clearly. You don't even need lots of money to do it. You certainly don't need a big glossy building. It might help in certain situations, but not always. And then the choices you make. We've heard very clearly again from a number of speakers. I find often the choice about who are you going to involve to help you implement this vision, choosing the right people. And often as not, we leap again for paper qualifications. We don't understand the real fit of someone within an environment. What do people look under like under stressful situations? Or are they only used to dealing with things where they have untold resource levels rather than the aspect of perhaps having to be creative? And fundamentally, it comes down to these three words. People, number one. Great people, imaginative people, people who buy in, that go all in, are committed, design great programs if they are suitably educated and experienced. And then they do them in the places. But I can show you great coaches and organizations that do world-leading programs, often in places that many of us, particularly those of us in North America, would turn our nose up. We really would. So remember, number one, people designing great programs, implementing them effectively, and moving on, which means, of course, as we've heard again this morning, one of the greatest things you can give someone is your attention. Why? Because you use up time, and time is the one thing that you can't buy and you can't get back when you've used it. So if you're giving someone your attention, you're giving them the greatest gift. And fundamentally within that within that attention, is you need to build confidence and reinforce belief, fundamentally with your youngsters. We heard actually from Jim Kerr, the no dickheads aspect. Well, actually in the business world, Robert Sutton, a professor at Stanford in Harvard Business Reviews back in 2007, wrote this particular book and paper, The No Asshole Rule. Again, this comes back to selecting the right people at the right time. And again, I'm just going to finish with this particular one for you. That volunteerism cannot be an excuse for poor performance. Yes, we hear about lots of parental coaches, but one of the things I find very alarming at times is the fact that we often resort to the lowest common denominator of acceptable coach education, and then we let people loose on possibly our most precious resource, our 5 to 14-year-olds, when the kids and youth are incredibly plastic and elastic and malleable and impressionable. And yet we often put them in the hands of the least qualified, least paid, and least experienced at all people. We have to really reevaluate things if we're going to work to a different format. And so I hope I've given you some things to think about. I did want to mention one last thing because it came up in a roundabout way. If you truly want to learn about performance, true performance on demand, often with dire consequences of failure. And in most instances in sport, we don't have to live with dire consequences of failure. There's a few, okay? But the reality is, and I've had the great advantage to hear Luke speak before. We were both in Copenhagen a few years ago, and he brought it home to me, and I really thought about it as well. Read anything you can about military teams. And as you've heard, many of our great speakers have had involvement with military teams. Understand emergency medicine. The great Canadian psychologist Cal Bottrell wrote a great book about sustainable performance of emergency medical groups. So you can buy that book here in Canada. We can send you that as a resource later. Look at space exploration and deep water exploration. Both of these exploratory elements involve performance, sustainable performance, and performance on demand under dire consequences. We can learn a lot when dealing with our children and youth, because if we screw it up for them, we can give them dire consequences for the rest of their lives. Thank you.
Steve, thank you very much. Very inspiring once again. I'm sure coaches listening have their brains spinning with all kinds of great ideas. And I know you and I had that conversation before that, you know, talking about Canadians, that we are probably the world champions in glossy books. And when it's time to implement the glossy book, we're not the best, and others are probably better than us. And I think you mentioned that in your presentation also, and I think it's important also to consider that it's good to have a plan, but at the end of the day, like, we need to get going and we need to be all in.
Absolutely, Andre, on that point, you know, this aspect of doesn't always have to be perfect. Most of us can get to the 90% mark. We've just got to learn to pull the trigger. Think of software. Software comes out all the time, version 1, but within 24 hours, there's version 1.1. A week later, there's version 2.1, and then every so often there's a big overhaul. We understand that. Why can we not understand that with much of what we do? And this aspect of, you're right, around organizations that produce great campaigns and education, okay, but rarely move to the final 2 elements of that 4-stage process. And that's application, doing things, and the accountability, which then feeds back into renewing the campaign.
Totally. And that's kind of the mindset that we've had in creating this conference today. Like, it's not perfect. It's a 3-guy show. We don't want to have a team. We don't want to have a big machine behind, but at the end of the day, we're going to get better next time. And we saw the result today with outstanding speakers, including yourself. So thanks a lot, Steve. We got to go to our next and last speaker of the day. And much appreciated that you took the time today to speak with us.
Thank you. It's been an honor.